Ciao everyone, today we're going to talk about MIDI and how to properly route MIDI inside Pro Tools. Alright, what is MIDI? MIDI, first and foremost, stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Now, MIDI is not audio, but rather a streamline of information that gets routed to, let's say, a sampler, a MIDI device, that will trigger a precise command. An analogy can be made as a MIDI, it's nonetheless equal to the remote control you use on a daily basis to change channel, right? So you want to go in channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, raise or lower the volume. Same exact thing. You are sending a command to your television in that case that will respond to whatever it is that you want to do. The same thing gets applied to MIDI. So I will create a composition or a performance, and then I will use a data stream to trigger and enable the functionality of a virtual instrument. Now, what is great about MIDI is that given to its very small size and weight, we could create massive session if we know how MIDI can be streamed. As a matter of fact, when it comes to MIDI, we can stream up to 16 discrete channels using only one sampler or virtual instrument. I'm going to let you understand what I'm talking about. Here in Pro Tools, I have a loop that I have created a while ago. I'm going to just let you hear it. Nothing fancy. Now, for people that use Pro Tools, in many cases, the question leads in, should I use an instrument track or should I use a MIDI track? And what is the difference? Great question. I'm going to go ahead and create a stereo instrument track and a MIDI track. Now, what is the first thing you noticed in this new track window dialog box? Well, the first thing is that when we create a track, our instrument track comes in different format. It could be a mono track, stereo track, LCR, so on and so forth. For the time being, I'm just going to leave it stereo. But MIDI track have nothing. This should give you a hint of what you can do with MIDI and the differences between the two. I'm going to go ahead and click create. And there we have it. So these two are our MIDI and our instrument track. Now I'm going to let you see one thing in the specific. First and foremost, now that we are in the mix window, we notice two different things. First of all, the icon that are indicating what type of tracks we're dealing with. As a matter of fact, on an instrument track, we have a small keyboard icon. On a MIDI track, we have a MIDI connector. That's not the lesson yet. So I'm not going to be explaining all the connection that leads within the MIDI connector. The second thing is the signal flow. In other words, as you can see here, whereas on my instrument track, I could insert a virtual instrument. Let's say I'm going to go here and choose, let's go easy, we got a mini grand. And then right now I'll play my keyboard. We hear sound. I can as well insert dynamic, compression, or EQ. So let's go on EQ and let's say a one band equalizer. I could use my buses and, start creating a sort of premix of my virtual instrument. Well, on my MIDI track, as you can see over here, I have zero ability to do so. But these two tracks talk the same language. They speak MIDI language. The trick is understanding how to use these two different tracks, first of all, in order to maximize your production, but second of all, in order to allow your CPU of your computer to run smoothly. So what I'm going to do right now is to get rid of these two for a minute. because I will have to explain you how MIDI works and how we can do meaningful connections. So, whereas a lot of people will do this mistake in using only instrument tracks to create a production or a song arrangement, that will cause that your CPU of your computer CPU will run out of space. In other words, with a lot of virtual instrument, let's say if we are dealing with Kontakt, which is a sampler, is not only a virtual instrument, it's a sampler, and within that sampler we have a bunch of virtual instrument that we can use. Therefore, if I have to create an arrangement, it would be foolish from my end to only use instrument track and use one instance of a virtual instrument per track. That will make my CPU suffer a lot, which is not what we want. So here is when MIDI comes in. Remember when I said that talking about MIDI, we're talking about working with 16 discrete channels that can be streamed out of one line into one sampler? This is exactly what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to go in Pro Tools over here, and I will create a new aux track. Shift Command N, and my aux needs to be stereo, and this is going to be my sampler. And I haven't created an instrument track, okay? Because this is going to be the receiver. In the example I showed you before, or told you before, this is my television, right? Then I will play with my remote control. So, first and foremost, Command, click on the S to solo save the track. I'm going to go into my insert, multi-channel, instrument, and I'm going to load an instance of Kontakt. All right, so this is Kontakt. Kontakt is a sampler that within itself has many different libraries of sounds. It has percussions, orchestral stuff, piano, keys, retro machine, you name it. And of course, I don't have a lot. You can always purchase new library to add to the sampler. So in this case, what I want to do is to choose a virtual instrument to play. And I'm going to start with a piano. I'm going to go with a Gentleman library. So what a lot of people do is to use only virtual instrument on instrument tracks. Now, that would be right if the instrument that I'm playing with, it's only one virtual instrument. Let's say I will create an instrument track right now. And this is going to be my synth. Oops. So in this case, I could open up a synthesizer. I'm going to go and choose vacuum. And as you can see over here, this virtual instrument doesn't allow me to send any other signal. So if I play this, that's what we have. In other words, we cannot input within this virtual instrument more than one track because this is not a sampler. But if we were to choose Avid Expand 2, in this case, this is a sampler. And as a matter of fact, over here, we have 4 banks that we could use in order to send incoming signal by 4 tracks. I'm not going to use an instrument track because I told you I want to show you the proper routing for MIDI tracks. So right now we got Kontakt. I'm choosing a piano, and by playing on my keyboard, I don't hear anything. That's because we need to make a meaningful connection. So I'm going to go ahead and create 4 MIDI tracks. As I told you before, MIDI tracks have no ability to insert physically on the track an insert, an instrument, or even using buses. I'm going to start renaming the MIDI track, and let's see what can we do. Let's do a piano here. Command right arrow. We could call it, let's say, octave piano. And then let's see if we can play with some... Let's play with a library called Evolve. and then with some loop. All right. Now that I'm in my edit window, nothing is over here. Mix window, same thing. And that's because we have to make a connection to what? To our sampler. I'm gonna start by using my first track, my piano. If you click on your sampler inside your Kontakt library or whatever sampler is that you're using, you should have a section called MIDI channel. And if I click over here from port A, we see that we have up to 16 simultaneous input that can feed the overall sampler. That's why we got this number. So right now I'm perfectly fine with channel number 1. And what I have to do right now is just make the connection between the MIDI track and the sampler. So the way to do it is to leave the input set to all. And what you want to do is control the output. So right now I will click on where it says output. And I'm not going to go to predefine complete control, which is my MIDI, which is not a MIDI, it's actually a MIDI controller, it's not a MIDI keyboard, which is a big difference. I will go to sampler Kontakt and I will tell this track to feed channel 1. So in an optical of thinking source to destination, my source is my MIDI track and the composition that I will do that needs to feed the destination, which in this case is my piano. It could have been any other instrument. So far it's a piano. And if right now I play anything, we got audio. So let's see what can we do with it. First and foremost, I will restart my session. If you press the / on the numeric keypad, you can actually select the start position, and then I want to finish at the bar 17th. I've made my selection. I could actually do one more thing. I could press Control Command P, and this will enable my dynamic transport, so that even if I lose my selection, that's not a big deal, as my selection will always restart where this little blue arrow is. And if I want to move forward with 2 or 1 on the numeric keypad, you can move the playback. All right, so what I'm going to do is start laying down some piano and see what we come up with, okay? All right, I'm going to start with a very basic chord progression. Let's see. All right, let me set up a click. I will move this click out of the way. I will actually choose a different click type. So I'm going to go with, let's go on block. 7 on the numeric keypad to enable the click. All right. I will actually activate a very cool function, which is called wait for note. So once I click here, unless I play my keyboard, Pro Tools won't start recording. I will arm the track. I can start the playback or the click track, and until I press a key, Pro Tools won't record a single thing, which is very useful, especially if you are not a very consistent keyboard player like myself, and you need a little bit more time to get accustomed to the fingers positions. Now that we are done with this, I will do some editing. Now, there is a very cool function over here that could be accessed through your preferences, where it says Operations, Editing. And as you can see over here, I have set it up my tracks to a very cool function, especially when it comes to track height and track view. So track height, every time I press E on the alphanumeric keypad, I can fit any track to window. But the coolest thing happens on track view. As a matter of fact, in track view, I have waveform and volume line when I'm dealing with audio tracks. And when I'm dealing with MIDI, I want this to transform the MIDI region or MIDI clip over here into notes. So if right now on my MIDI track, I press minus, the opposite would be on an audio track, which right now I had the volume automation. So right now I can have minus and I have my MIDI notes. And if I press E, I don't need the MIDI editor anymore. So right now I can simply do some editing based on what I got over here. So I'm gonna use my pencil tool and just make my sloppy performance a little bit more. All right. I'll raise the velocity of this note a tiny bit. Cool. Remove the velocity with minus. And I'm going to do the exact same thing here. All right, let's see what we got. Slightly too bow. Slightly too high, I'd say. Way too high. All right, I just need to raise the velocity on this note. To do so, you can hover over the MIDI note, hold down Command, and now you can raise the volume. All right, let's do a little bit up. Cool. All right, I like that. So now that we have arranged our performance, I can do a few more things. First and foremost, I will move back to blocks, and I can easily Option click or Command D and duplicate this performance throughout the whole length of the song. Let's see what we got here. All right, so what I'm gonna do is very easy. I will actually zoom in a tiny bit, move up. And what I'm gonna do is to, oops, duplicate this over there. So we should have an ending. Yep, correct. So now that we have concluded our first pass, it's about time for me to show you how to properly route every other MIDI track to our sampler. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is to go into my sampler and mess a little bit around with the sound of this piano. So I want a lot of reverb on this first piano. So let's see what we can do. Nice. All right, I do feel I want to add a couple of extra notes, but I want to have the ability to have a different type of sounding environment around my piano. So what I can do, instead of creating another virtual instrument, is to just add another instrument within my sampler. So I'm gonna go where it says, again, gentleman, piano, double click on it. And now what I'm gonna do is to actually choose a smaller, let's go with Studio Bright. Let's see what we got. Cool. So the first thing you have to notice are the MIDI channel input. As a matter of fact, right now we got MIDI channel, of course, the A patch or port, channel number 2. This is channel number 1. This means that right now we have to go on our MIDI output. Just going to show you here in the mix window. And what we have to do is to go where it says octave. Actually, I'm going to recall it piano octave. All right. I'm going to go on the output of this MIDI track, select my sampler, and I've called it sampler. If I would have left it renamed aux, this would have been aux. It's telling me the type of sampler I have on that track, and the only thing I have to do is to select the channel I want to send my signal in. Channel 2, and as a matter of fact, we do. All right. Let's go ahead and compose something. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is to change the octave through my MIDI controller. All right, let's see what I can do. Again, my wait for note, it's enabled. So I have all the time of this world to just get ready to record. 7 on the numeric keypad to enable my recording. 3 to punch in the record. And until I press a key, nothing will happen. All right, so now that we have finished finally the second performance, an amazing performance, not really. Again, I will minus to move to notes, E to maximize my view. I want to remove the click track, and now if I press Option, Control, plus and minus, I could actually change my grid resolution, as you can see. So I want to go on 16th notes, actually 8 notes, and quantize all of this. So there is a quickie in Pro Tools that leads within the event menu. If I press Option 0 on the numeric keypad, right now I can decide the quantization grid and as well the strength, which for the purpose of this demonstration, I will just leave for 100. And look what happens to all the MIDI notes. Bam, they all snap to 16th. Option 0 to remove it. And now let's fix a couple of their velocities. So by pressing minus right now, I have access to all their velocities. First, I will fix the timing and then the velocity. All right. Cool. Cool. See, with the pencil tool, it's just easier to edit notes and move them wherever we want. Cool. All right. So now what I can do, and this is something that a lot of people also get a heart attack with. If in Pro Tools, you see I'm selecting my pencil tool and I hold on Option, I have this little selector icon showing up. If I select from top to bottom, nothing appears. But if I select from bottom to top, you see that little note icon that appears? Now, if it was drums, you would get a heart attack. Okay, so I'm gonna make my selection and let's say Option R. I want to repeat this for, let's say, 4 times. Maybe 4 times is a little bit too much, but with Option R, that's just an easy way to go when it comes to get rid of everything. Cool. So E minus, and there what we got as the trim. Great. Let's move forward and let's finish up this composition. So now, still from the same sampler, I'm going to go ahead and select, let's say, evolve mutation. So from evolve mutation, I'm going to go ahead and let's go with percuss, score menu 5. Let's see what we got here. Now, evolve mutation, it's an amazing library of very messed up sounds if you want. And so right now I want something very percussive, a loop, so to speak, and let's see how I can fit that up. So what I'm going to do is to analyze what MIDI channel we have over here. I'm going to go on my MIDI track, sampler, channel 3. And here we have it. So I'm going to go ahead and figure out a way to play something high pitch on 16th notes, and let's see how I feel about that. All right, I really dig these 3 sounds over here. Same as before, the track is armed, width for note is there. Let's do this. All right, so now we have the second performance, and I will just give a little edit over here and there. I'm gonna go here and see what we got. Okay, actually I'm gonna start this up here, and I will as well duplicate this. First and foremost, I want to do some editing. So we'll select them all. 0, apply, okay. So now I can select my notes. See how easy it is now that we have that function to edit everything underneath our tracks. Duplicate, and here we have it. Cool. Last instrument, let's choose even more percussive loops. And to do so, I'm going to go into, again, my sampler and choose, let's go with Retro Machine. Let's see what we got here. In Your Face, bass. That's what I'm going to choose. All right. So this time, instead of performing that, I will just write it down into my MIDI editor. So I want to start my selection from there. So let's go here. I will just re-enable my selection over there. We'll just lower the velocity a tiny bit. Also modify a little bit this piano. It's a little bit too dead. Okay, cool. So let's go and hear how this sounds. Now, as you can see right now, nothing is actually playing. I mean, the MIDI is receiving the input from my MIDI controller, right? But we see the signal, but we don't hear anything because we have to output our performance into the sampler. So I'm going to go again, once again, into the output, sampler, channel 4. I want to make sure that in our sampler, channel 4 is selected. And as a matter of fact, it is. Ooh, cool sounds. I've only played the note just because I want to have a visual representation of where this note is. So I will maximize my view, T to zoom in. And now here's a cool fact. Now I want to create a bunch of, let me zoom in a tiny bit. And to zoom in and move up and down, I'm using Control, Option, Command, and the scroll wheel to zoom up and to move up and down. Shift, Option, Command, and then the wheel to zoom in and zoom out on the MIDI track height. Useful commands. So here's what I'm going to do. I identified the note. Now, in the MIDI preferences over here, I can actually tell my pencil tool to not follow the grid, which is 16th note, and to set it up to 16th note. The last thing I want to do, again, within my grid menu, Option, Control minus, and move to 16th notes, as you can see over here. And now what I could do is simply get my pencil tool, set it up into line, and what I can do is simply, I want to have a better visual representation, click and drag. Cool. Performance done. Let's see how that sounds. Might be a little loud, so I'm going to lower that a little bit. And that's you. And there you have it. So right now we have created 4 different MIDI performances. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Their output is right now feeding the input of our separate discrete MIDI channel within our sampler. And so right now we're using 4 different instruments in 1 track. This is great because if you think in an optic of maximizing the power of your CPU, that's exactly what you want. But now we have a different problem. All these tracks are feeding a sampler, which is an aux track, and that means that if on this aux track I want to add reverb, gain processor, effect processors, or whatsoever, this will affect all these tracks. So your question might be, okay, what if I want to have a little bit more control over the first piano you played? Well, this is the next step. So once you're happy with the performance, once you're happy with the way you wrote that, now you have to transform the MIDI performance into actual waveform. And this is how we're going to do it. In my mix window, I'm going to go ahead and create 4 tracks. They need to be stereo, since the samples that I'm using are stereo. And there I have it. I will rename them accordingly. And there they are. So now, the first thing we want to do is, again, think more in an optic of source to destination, right? So what I'm going to do is to go into the input section of my audio track. So we're changing completely path. And what I'm going to do is to click on input, and I'm not going to choose any hardware input. Not going to choose any bus, but I'm going to go into plugin. Plugin, it tells me which plugin I'm dealing with. And right now we have the option to select the input we want to feed from Kontakt. A little confusing, I know. Bear with me. I'm going to go into Kontakt. And as you can see, on every single instance of these tracks, the input-output is divided in 2 different categories. MIDI channel input, so the receiving of a performance, and a physical output, which right now is set to stereo 1 on each single track. So here's what I want to do. First and foremost, I will show up my output list. And if I play this performance, as you can see, right now, all my tracks are coming out from output 1 and 2. Good when you're producing, not good when you have to actually mix the audio, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into each single channel, And where it says output stereo, I'm going to go with create a separate output channel. And I want this output to be routed to stereo 2 because stereo 1 is the output of our sampler. And instead I want to output this to a different pair of stereos. So I'm going to go ahead and say stereo 2, which corresponds to 3 and 4. Second sampler. Create separate meter output channel. Okay. I'm going to go on 5 and 6. Again, I'm going to go here and say create a separate output. And you're going to go on 7 and 8. And lastly, 9 and 10. So look what happened right now that I'll play back this. I'm going to mute the loop. We do not hear absolute nothing, but the meters down here are actually moving. So that means that audio, it's being rerouted through our sampler into some physical output. So now is where our audio tracks will come in handy. So on our physical audio track, what I want to do is to go under input, choose plugin, Kontakt. I'm going to start with Kontakt Stereo 2, Kontakt Stereo 3. I'm just going to follow the exact same order I have over here, right? So as you can see, Stereo 2 is my first piano, Stereo 3 is my second piano. Now we have our Evolve, which is sampler Stereo 4. And last but not least, we have our Stereo 5. Just going to go there. So the last thing I want to do is to arm my tracks, remove my dynamic transport, make a slightly longer selection over here, press 3 and record this performance. First of all, I have to remove my wait for note, and there we have it. Now we can actually make inactive all our MIDI file, hide them, and we are free to move into our mix window and to start mixing our song. And there you have it. So remember, to take full advantage of MIDI language is an extremely powerful and yet still sometimes misunderstood tool that you have at your disposal every time it comes to creating music. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Until the next one, ciao.